All right, hey sophomores. So I'm really excited today to introduce to you our first novel we're going to be reading this semester called Fahrenheit 451. I'm very excited about it because it is my favorite novel, especially my favorite novel to teach. So I hope you guys will enjoy it. Um, I'll just be blunt with you. There's some parts of it at the beginning that can be a little slow, but if you stick with it, it really is a good story. And I've paced it out, so hopefully it won't be too overwhelming for you. And we'll have some discussion. I'm hoping to have at least one interesting activity before we do an essay to close out this unit and this first quarter. So let me share a screen with you because I'm going to give you kind of an introduction to what this novel is, the themes of the novel, the author behind it. So let me get into it once I share my screen. Okay. So, um, starting with a little bit about the author. So Ray Bradbury. Oh, let me let this load. Ray Bradbury is the name of the author. Fun fact: he grew up in Waukegan, Illinois, which is not that far from us. If any of you have been to Six Flags up in Gurnee, if you were to continue going north a little bit more, you would get to Waukegan. So it's not that far away. Um, but Ray Bradbury, what was interesting about him was he was very fascinated by the concept of living forever. Um, he was at a when he was a kid. He tells a story in an interview he was in. When he was a kid, he went to a carnival and saw a magic man named Mr. Electro, and he did this whole thing where he had lightning kind of created through through static electricity, and he had this like cool display, and it really wowed Ray Bradbury. And the magician, after he did this, Mr. Electro pointed at Ray Bradbury, like he pointed to the crowd, but it was like specifically at Ray Bradbury as a kid, and said, "Live forever, live forever." And ever since then, Ray Bradbury is fascinated by that idea, and so he thought to himself that the best way to live forever is to write, and that way your writing, if it will carry on until the end of time. So because of all this, because of some of the things he read, he was really interested in science fiction and fantasy. L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz, Jules Verne, who wrote Around the World in 80 Days and 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea, um, are some of the authors that really inspired him. Um, he never attended college, but he did self-teach himself at the library, which is pretty cool. His first official pay as a writer came from he wrote a little joke that he submitted to a TV show and they read it. Um, so not really exactly what he was going for, but he did get a small little. I think he said he got 10 cents for that. So, woo. But he wrote several hours a day. He sold newspapers to support himself, and in the end, he wrote 30 books, 600 short stories, poems, essays, screenplays, and plays. But the one that he is most known for is what we are going to read, which is Fahrenheit 451. So that's a little bit about Ray Bradbury, about his interest in everything. The other thing I should say is Ray Bradbury grew up during the era of World War II and the Great Depression, and um, he published Fahrenheit. Let me check when. I forget what exactly, but it was in the 50s, I believe. Let me double check this. I will get a fact check here in a minute. But I believe he published it in the 50s, which, if any of you are history people, if you're into history, yeah, published 1953. So that's 8 years after the war, after World War II ended. If any of you are into history, you'll know that after the World War II, there was all of a sudden this huge scare in America of communism. And everybody was worried that communism and that communists would come into America, basically infect and slowly take over America. And honestly, there's still people today that are really concerned about that as well. But it was like at an all-time high of paranoia back in the 50s. And it was all because after World War II, which was horrible, all due to a dictator, Hitler, people were paranoid about anybody who might rise to that kind of power again and repeat that, because obviously everyone knows it was a horrific time of history. So that's important to consider, because as you read this story, Fahrenheit 451, you'll find that there's actually this kind of overarching war that's going on in the background of the story. It's really not the most important part of the story, but there's a little aspect to it that's focusing on a war. But this idea of paranoia and controlling people is definitely something that Ray Bradbury kind of infused into his writing. So what I want to get into is kind of a couple of the themes of Fahrenheit 451. So the first one is censorship. Censorship is basically it's the practice of, well, you guys know what censorship is. If you guys ever listen to the radio, I don't know if you do, but if you do listen to the radio, some of the music you might listen to that would have cuss words in it or profane language is often either silenced or replaced with another word. And censorship is basically government entities that determine what is appropriate and safe for the general public to hear or to read or to watch. Okay. It generally deals with our entertainment. So that's kind of an interesting thing to note as well. Another example would be sometimes if you watch any movies that are airing on TV, sometimes those movies will have different words put in for things. And one of my favorite examples is the movie Snakes on a Plane, which I've never actually seen, but I've just seen this one scene. There's a scene when Samuel L. Jackson is known for saying, "I'm tired of these bleeping snakes on this bleeping plane." And they, instead of bleeping it on the TV movie, the words they replaced it with was, what was it? "I'm tired of these monkey fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane." And it's just such a stretch. It didn't really even make sense, but it was hilarious. But that's an example of censorship. So censorship, it's easy to make fun of, but it really is a serious issue when it comes to what we are allowed to watch. Should we be allowed to watch or read or listen to whatever we want all the time, or should there be a certain limit to things? And that is part of, I guess, your evaluation as you read this, because this book definitely touches on censorship and really the dangers of censorship. Okay. And can you control people by allowing them to see or understand or read or watch or listen to certain things? Okay. And we'll dive more into censorship as we go on in this story. But one quick example I'll give you is that's kind of a part of censorship is when you Google things or Facebook or anything like that, the reason that those sites are free is because they make money off of your data. So when you Google things, they are able to use that data to run certain calculations and all this stuff. Well, Google and Facebook, if you've ever noticed on social media, sometimes all of a sudden you'll see an advertisement for something that you were just talking about, and they're able to use different different mathematical programs in the computer to make sure you see certain things that are according to your interests and not so much things that are according to, so they almost like censor what you see for you in a way. I have a lot more I could say about that, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next theme. Okay, conformity versus individuality. This is the other major theme in here. If we had more time this quarter, I would have us read the poem "The Road Not Taken." My understanding is many of you have read that in middle school before, but it's all about, Robert Frost wrote all about how he came to this fork in the road in the middle of the woods, and one was like a clear path. He could see where he was going. And this other path was overgrown. It hadn't been walked on in years. Couldn't really tell if it was, what was ahead of him or what to expect. But he said, I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And when we think about conformity versus individuality, conformity is when we decide to act and behave and do everything in the same way that other people do. So following the crowd, following the masses, just doing it along with everything else other people believe in are doing. Individuality is focusing on, what do you believe in? Why do you believe it? And are you going to stick to it? Or are you going to be like everybody else and just kind of go that way? So when you think about Robert Frost's poem of the two roads diverging in the wood and taking the one that's less traveled by, that is kind of what he's saying is, if you take that road, it's going to develop more character. It's going to strengthen your beliefs in what you believe in, as opposed to just taking the road that everybody else goes down. So another way to think of it is, I remember as a kid, I saw kind of an image of like a fish swimming in a river, and there's a whole school of fish swimming one way down this river, and obviously the current is pushing them this way. And there's this one fish that's swimming this way upriver. Now, all these fish swimming with the current might tell that fish, "Oh, you're stupid because you're not using the current to help you go." But that one fish is sticking to what he believes and is going against the tide, against the current, against the school of fish. And so that is kind of what to think about with this too, with conformity versus individuality. The last thing I want to touch on, there's some examples of censorship, real quickly, of burning books in Nazi Germany. That's one of the most historical, like, dangerous examples of it, where they were only allowing their German citizens to read books and radio and whatever that supported what the Nazi regime believed in. So Bibles and any book that said anything against what the Nazi regime and the Third Reich was pushing was burned. So that way it prevented people from even getting that information. So that's like a historical haunting example of censorship. So we talked about censorship already. Ray Bradbury. Okay, so then real quick, conformity and individuality. You look at slavery or racism, I guess, in America, and it's easy for a lot of people to just kind of follow the one way and to, well, especially in the 1800s when there was slavery, it was easy for people to just turn a blind eye and be like, "Oh yeah, he owns slaves," or whatever. And it was easy for the slaves to just kind of go on with their life and accept that this was their life. But you have examples of people who stood up against that, such as Harriet Tubman is a great example of a slave who helped run the whole Underground Railroad to free the slaves. That was individuality instead of conformity. Frederick Douglass, which is actually who my seniors are reading about, he was able to escape slavery through learning how to read and to write. So these are examples of people going the other way, going against conformity. And then during World War II, these three people I've listed here, Klaus von Stauffenberg, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and Johann Elzer, are all actually people who attempted assassinations on Adolf Hitler to help end the war and end the terror in Nazi Germany. And so they're also going against the current, against the conformity. All right, so the last thing to discuss here that I want to touch on before I'm done with this video is the concept of culture, because that's kind of what our whole theme is. So when we talk about culture, and how does this affect this story? There are there are 5 major characters in this story, and these 5 characters all respond to culture in a different way. And that is what I want you to keep in mind. Remember, culture does not necessarily mean different kinds of people from different parts of the world, all this stuff. Culture for us just simply means your environments and their surroundings. This story picks up right away in a culture that's already censoring everything, and there's a lot of conformity going on. And in this book, you will see somebody that is scared of the culture, somebody that conforms to the culture, somebody that goes against the culture. The main character is kind of a combination of those. And then the main villain is somebody who takes advantage of the culture, and kind of rules over everything. So you're going to be looking at how these different characters deal with their surroundings and their environment, and the way they deal with them kind of says a lot about who their character is. So I want you to keep that in mind as we start reading this, is how does the surroundings of each of these characters affect who they are, and why do they believe what they believe based on their surroundings. And when you write, this is important to consider, because when you write your essay, you're going to be asked to explain how culture affects people. And if you have examples from this book, you will be in really good shape. So keep notes on the characters and how they change based on their surroundings. How does their surroundings affect who they are? All right. Okay. That is all I have for this introduction. So remember, mainly remember the themes are culture, conformity versus individuality, and censorship. All right, the 3 C's: culture, conformity versus individuality, and censorship. All right. Thank you all for watching, and enjoy reading Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury.